We're talking about a whole bunch of stuff, but in particular, like our effort and our move to redirect and defund the amount of money that is spent in policing. I don't look at it as a slogan. It's an actual real political goal.
Good morning, Val and Terrell. Brandon Johnson is waking up as the mayor-elect of Chicago this morning. He will be
Just when you think things have gotten as bad as they could possibly be, just when you say to yourself, there's no possible way things could be worse, they turn out to get even worser, and that's exactly what happened in Chicago with their early April mayoral election, because, off-year mayoral elections in the middle of April are definitely the most productive way to elect quality candidates, where they replace ousted Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who you might know as Beetlejuice, with Brandon Johnson, who's an even more radical, even more in favor of defunding the police, even more progressive, anti-white, racist Democrat. That's what we're going to talk about today, because I can't believe, well, actually I can, because I'm a cynical nightmare, we're going to hell in a handbasket kind of person, that this just happened, and yeah, we need to discuss what's going on. But before we get into what's going on in Chicago, we have a sponsor, a loyal sponsor of today's video, so let me chuck it to them, bring it back over here, and we'll discuss this whole thing on the other side, and I'll make you feel better about the world falling apart. A new survey shows that 52% of Americans are currently trying to lose weight, but the thing is, it ain't easy. If it was, we would have a lot less people trying to get control over it. This is why you need a boost. Go over to ketowithjustice.com and get this amazing keto powder. It helps boost your chances of losing weight by elevating your ketones, and you could try this 60-day money-back guarantee for 51% off at ketowithjustice.com. Start meeting your weight loss goals today. ketowithjustice.com. So as many of you guys know, and I believe we talked about it on this channel, crime is getting worse in this country, and in specific cities, specifically left-wing cities, it seems to be getting even worser than the national average. And a perfect example of this is the city of Chicago, which is seeing homicide rates that they have not seen since the 1990s. Now, it's not the worst that it's ever been. I know there's some people out there in the left-wing version of this audience who are going to say that if they could find any year in the history of Chicago where crime was worse in any category, therefore crime is down. But I assure you, these are stunning rates, as the city of Chicago has not seen over 800 murders at all in 25 years. So it's kind of a big deal to those of us who could think logically, who have some processing power in our brains, and it may be concerning to residents of Chicago. And a lot of people came under the impression that that was in fact the case, when in the primary for their election, they ousted left-wing progressive mayor and potential Beetlejuice reboot casting option, Lori Lightfoot. However, a lot of people were less optimistic, less hopeful that the ousting of Lightfoot would lead to any results, because while you did have Paul Vallis, the more conservative, more tough on crime, endorsed by the police union's candidate as one of the remaining figures in the runoff, you also had Johnson, who has been very publicly in favor of defunding the police.
Today, candidate for mayor Brandon Johnson said he would cut the Chicago police budget by at least $150 million.
And we cannot ignore that Vallis is a white person and Johnson is a black person, so there was a chance that if people voted, black people specifically, who care about race more than any other group in this country, and that is true in Chicago, on racial lines, that Vallis would have a very troubling uphill battle. And it turns out that was immediately the case, because essentially what Brandon Johnson ran his campaign on, other than doubling down on the same policies of Lori Lightfoot, which was defund the police, don't have law enforcement do anything, pretend that you're going to make quote-unquote investments in trying to attack the root causes of criminality, which is ridiculous, and we've gone over a million times on this channel, and of course, that his opponent was an evil white racist. In fact, I remember after the election, I was watching the Philip DeFranco show, because I often watch his crappy show to get an idea of what the left wing is saying, and he played this clip, and this pretty much exemplifies how this entire campaign went.
The fact that he's being dismissive of a black man who taught for 4 years in Chicago public schools is
You got to stop doing that, Paul. You just do.
Criticizing his leadership ability and his lack of management competency. That's what I'm questioning, not his 4 years as a teacher. When he retires,
Then don't bring it up.
Well, he'll actually retire with a teacher pension, despite the fact that he's only been a teacher for 4 years.
So Vallis says Johnson is not qualified because Johnson's not qualified to be mayor, and Johnson retorts by saying that Vallis is essentially an evil white racist, and the only reason he's questioning his non-existent qualifications is due to the fact that he happens to be black. And wow, isn't he an evil white racist? Evil white racism. Vote for me, because if you don't vote for me, you basically ain't black. Yes, it's the Joe Biden strategy, except it worked here. Now look, it is not a mystery how we got to the point in the city of Chicago where we're seeing a horrible upward trend of homicides getting to the worst level that they've been in 25 years and only going up, and all these other crimes going out of control, because we have the policies and the results of those policies to look at. Because Lori Lightfoot, like I said, was nobody's conservative, was nobody's tough on crime candidate. She was a woke left-wing progressive who sided with the Black Lives Matter rioters and used those opportunities to restrict law enforcement, and we see horrible results in terms of the criminality. One of the things that the city of Chicago does not do is chase criminals. They refuse to do that without authorization from a supervisor. So if you steal a car and you take off, the police cannot pursue you unless they get specific authorization from a higher up, which if you're driving like a maniac down the road, you're probably going to be gone by the time they get that authorization, because they believe that it's actually the police chasing the person who's already in the stolen car that causes the danger and causes the criminality. In fact, we did a story on this channel of some guys who tried to rob a military veteran, pointed a gun at him. A grandmother from a window screamed out, distracted the guys from a split second. The military guy broke away, took off running. The police were actually called to the scene. They got behind the car of these guys, which were 3 armed criminals, career criminals, and asked for authorization to chase that person. They were not granted that authorization, and those career criminals ended up robbing 3 more people that day before they were ultimately arrested. So 3 more people faced a group of armed robbers, thugs, because of the policies of the city of Chicago, and that is just one way that crime multiplies due to the soft on-crime policy. However, it's actually not just the mayor, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, that was the problem in the city of Chicago. We also have the Cook County District Attorney's Office, which is supposed to prosecute the cases. So they've already basically made it incredibly difficult for the police to do their job. But on top of that, they have Kimberly Fox, who's a left-wing, George Soros-funded, Sean King-supported district attorney. You might remember her for cutting that sweetheart deal for Jussie Smollett when he staged that hate hoax in order to boost his own profile. Well, she doesn't prosecute anyone. In fact, we did a whole video on this channel about a criminal who started his crime spree within the borders of Cook County, inside of Chicago, ended up going in a stolen car to another county, was stopped by a different police force after a lengthy police chase. He ended up assaulting a dog, and then when he was arrested by the police, he laughed in their faces, saying that he would be out on Sunday. Of course, this aggravated the Will County District Attorney, who, by the way, looks like Commissioner Gordon.
This criminal history and what he's just done, and he thinks he's in Cook County, he's going to be out by Sunday. Not a chance. Not a chance.
And he ended up deciding that he was going to try the case in Will County. Well, that defendant specifically petitioned the court to transfer him to Cook County under Kimberly Fox, because his series of felonies before that were supposedly prosecuted by this woman, but in reality, she just gave him a slap on the wrist, allowed him to be released with relatively no jail time. Now, thankfully, in Will County, they actually prosecute crimes, so that guy ended up getting 22 years for his lengthy crime spree. It was not just punching the dog, not just stealing the car, not just the other armed robbery that he committed that day, but all of the crimes that he committed and the many pending charges, by the way, that he still should be prosecuted for, that led him to that lengthy sentence. But even the criminals know, as exemplified from that case, that you want to be tried in Cook County. So the mayor elected in this position had a tall order on his or her hands, even though it was 2 dudes, so it would have been his hands, going up against the corrupt machine that was Chicago and Cook County. But this guy is all about defunding the police. And it's not something that he's ambiguous about, even though he kind of pretended it away during the general election or this portion of the primary after the runoff, whatever you want to call it. I don't even care. It's a freaking early April election. Doesn't matter. Whoever wins the Democratic primary ends up winning the freaking thing.
On multiple occasions, you've spoken on the topic of defunding police. In 2020, you said, quote, defunding this failed system of incarceration and policing was not just admirable, but necessary, end quote. During a town hall called Police Free Future, you commended defund organizers for, quote, an agenda that actually can transform people's lives, and said, quote, removing ourselves away from state-sponsored policing. That is commendable. As far as redirecting funds, if we look at your record, you introduced a resolution and passed it with the support of others to redirect money from the sheriff's office to other areas. So first, this is a multi-part question. The first is just a yes or no. Do you acknowledge making those recorded and documented statements, yes or no?
I'm not going to defund the police.
If you could answer the question, though.
Yeah.
Do you acknowledge making the statements that I just read by quote, yes or no?
What I've acknowledged is the fact that there are people who are incredibly frustrated.
Mr. Johnson, if I could get you back to the question,
Yeah, of course.
It's solely yes or no. Do you acknowledge making those statements?
Look, you've
Yes or no?
already quoted. What I'm saying is, though,
So you
is that it
acknowledge making
provides
those
some
statements?
Of course, I'm acknowledging it,
Okay,
but I want to
so
make
I
sure
wanna
that we
give you
have
the opportunity
context
to
to
answer
that.
That is the candidate who just won the mayorship in the city of Chicago. And he says, don't worry about it. You guys need to relax, because what he's going to do besides defund your police, neuter them even more, work in tandem with the woke prosecutor in Cook County who doesn't prosecute anyone, but he's also going to arrest poverty, because I don't know if you guys know this, it is far more important to brain dead progressives to address these alleged root causes rather than, deal with the criminality. Now, I've talked about this on this channel multiple different times. I've went over their alleged root causes, income inequality, poverty, and all that nonsense, and explained to you time and time again that you're not going to solve the problem of criminality by arresting poverty. You're not going to solve it by pretending that criminals are Aladdin, because in reality, what we find out is that crime generates more and more poverty. If you have a certain amount of theft in an area, that increases the cost for businesses. It actually makes certain big box stores who rely on selling you a lot of volume at small profit margins not viable in that area, and then it leads to smaller stores that end up having to charge more, both due to the theft and due to the fact that they don't have the economies of scale, paying higher insurance premiums, and all these other consequences. So what we find in these major metropolitan areas is that you can't address crime by arresting poverty, because in reality the poverty is largely driven by the criminality. And again, just think about it logically. Would you invest money in a business in an area where a bunch more of your inventory is going to be stolen? You might be on the hook for your employees getting killed in robberies, for civil litigation, for not protecting them enough, and all of that. Or would you invest money in a better area where there's less theft, you have to pay less for insurance, and there's less of a chance that one of your employees is going to get shot while working for you, thus not opening you up to a crazy lawsuit? The answer to that question is absolutely obvious to everybody except for left-wing progressives. On top of that, as I've talked about multiple different times, and again, this is something that has been broken down throughout the history of criminal justice research, we have tried addressing crime by addressing poverty before. That led to the insane crime wave of the 80s and 90s. Well, it actually peaked in the 80s and 90s. It actually started in the 60s. So 40 years of crime based on this arrest poverty mantra, because that doesn't work. And that is the fact that even if poverty were the root cause of criminality, even if we grant that premise, that does not mean the most efficient way to deal with criminality is to address that root cause. And one of the analogies that I like to use is earthquake and earthquake preparation. We know for a fact, unlike the poverty thing, which is a theory that actually is not supported by the data, that earthquakes are caused by shifts of tectonic plates. Now, if I gave you $1 billion to deal with the issue of earthquakes and their fallouts, would you say the most efficient way to deal with that is to try to control tectonic plates moving beneath the surface, the crust of the earth, and all that? Likely not. Likely that would be a waste of $1 billion. It would be far more efficient to address the problems associated with those, which are the damage to buildings and the risk to people's lives on the surface. So likely you would spend the majority of that money not trying to control tectonic plates, but on earthquake proofing, because that would mitigate the consequences. So So even if we accept the root cause, which, by the way, is not supported by the facts, I've gone over this a million times on this channel, and we buy into that completely, it is still the root cause fallacy to say that the most efficient way to address the problem of criminality is to go after the root cause. Now, what I say, and one of the things I want you to keep in your head, is that root causes are not more important than any other kind of cause for criminality. And what we should do is address criminality in the most efficient way possible to get that number down. And you will be shocked and surprised if you're a left-wing progressive when you start bringing down the crime rates in certain areas, how quickly people start investing money in those same areas. So yeah, Chicago completely failed in this election. Now, it's due to a number of factors. One, you have the racial issue. It's just a fact that Johnson ran on my opponent is an evil white racist, I am the candidate for black people, and that worked to a demographic that is more obsessed with identity than any other demographic in the United States of America, or at least I should say any other racial demographic, because we know the alphabet people are also very obsessed with identity. Two, he was also endorsed by teachers unions and all these other groups, and in an off-year election, which again 2023, and an election that is not in November, again this election took place in April, having the endorsements of big machines like the teachers union that can marshal out voters in a depressed turnout is going to have more of an impact. So we have all these confluence of factors that ultimately ended up leading to the worst possible candidate, somebody who's actually worse than Lori Lightfoot, being elected to this position. And now we're going to see problems in Chicago that maybe will get to the worst they've ever been in the last 30 years. And then somebody will say, well, you know what? Chicago used to have more murders than this 32 years ago. So I guess crime is down comparatively because it's only the worst it's ever been in 30 years. Right now, it's already the worst it's ever been in 25 years. But don't worry, people on the left wing will go back in 26 years and say, oh, you know, it was worse back then. So I guess it's fine. Crime is down comparatively. Pay no attention to recent trends. Why would we be bothered by that? Are you, in fact, an evil white racist for bringing up the fact that murders are completely out of control? You're an evil white racist for pointing out that among the 800 plus murdered, which is the most in 25 years, over 80% of those people are black in the city of Chicago. Wow, aren't you racist for pointing it out? How dare you? What we need to do is give these Aladdins some loaves of bread for their family, and they'll stop killing each other in the streets. Trust us, this is the way. I mean, this is exactly what Lori Lightfoot did before this, so it's definitely going to work if we double down on it, and that's how we got it here in the first place. But trust us, a bit progressive. Look, I don't have a lot of hope for Chicago. I don't think you should either. It's obviously a disastrous situation, but hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Chicago going completely off the rails, getting even worse in their candidate selection. Till next time.